Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah insider for KSL Sports. Man, it's been a week. It's been a hectic week, but it is already Friday of rivalry week. I can't believe it. I really appreciate having Terrell Burgess and Hunter Dimmick hopping on the podcast with me this week. I'm going to be flooding the podcast streams today with episodes that we've recorded previously and also doing our live stream last night. So that's what this is. It's just an intro to each one of these episodes. There will be a crossover episode with me and Mitch Harper of KSL Sports, who does a great job with the Cougar Tracks podcast. We recorded 2 episodes, actually. The first one, just diving into some of the storylines and some of the talk around the game and all of that, diving into some pizza talk as well. The next episode will be me and Mitch Harper, talking a little bit of the X's and O's and the matchups, more football talk there. The third episode will be the live stream from last night with Josh Bennett and a special guest hopping on with us, Dustin, and really appreciate him. And then the fourth episode will be a basketball episode with the exhibition tonight. Really excited to get a look at the Runnin' Utes under Alex Jensen. It's an exhibition for all fans to attend for free. Game tips off at 7 p.m. up at the Huntsman Center. And again, I hope that there's a great turnout. Again, this is going to be a really fun, exciting team. I think Alex Jensen is, I think there's just a lot of interest and a lot of intrigue around the Alex Jensen era kicking off. So really excited for that. You can hear Miles in the background, I'm sure. So I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to cut this off, chop this up into the other episodes, and just have at it. So appreciate you guys.
Welcome back into another crossover rivalry edition. Cougar Tracks and the Utah Blockcast. Mitch Harper, BYU insider for KSL Sports, and joining me is the host of the Utah Blockcast and Utah insider for KSL Sports, Steve Bartle. We did an earlier week episode, Steve, where we kind of dove into the fun storylines, some memories, even pizza recommendations. This one, we're going to dive into more ball, and this is a really good matchup, I think. And even Kyle Whittingham talked about it, how both these teams are very similar.
Yeah, no, I mean, you look at the numbers and it's hard to distinguish, which one from which. Like if you did the team A versus team B, you wouldn't be able to really tell much of a difference between these two teams. And, they go about it in different ways, but at the end of the day, the production is eerily similar is what I think Kyle Whittingham said when you look at just the numbers. And I think this matchup is so fascinating because of just how similar these two teams are. I think it's going to be a fun one on Saturday.
It really is. BYU and Utah, 6:00 kick. We will have coverage throughout the day on KSLSports.com. It's going to be a busy, busy day. I mean, it's always a big deal when BYU and Utah play each other, but it is interesting, Steve, when you look at the numbers. They're just so close, and I like how you put that they go about it in different ways because, I think that BYU, I look at the scoring offenses of these teams. BYU's averaging 39.5 or 37.5 points per game, Utah 39.5. Part of me you look at that and say, maybe this could be a high-scoring game, but I kind of feel like BYU would rather have this be a lower scoring game. And in years past in this rivalry, I think BYU is always like, let's get it high scoring. Utah could win a rock fight, whereas I think Utah's offense, they feel very comfortable getting this thing, if possible, to the 30s. What do you see as far as the offense for Utah showing up, like maybe what they want the style of this rivalry matchup to look like?
Yeah, I think Utah is comfortable in either sort of manner, right? I think because what Utah has shown this season, which has completely flipped on its head from last year, is just the ability to capitalize and get the ball into the end zone at a really high rate. And it's not that they're, incorporating a lot of different players or, that they rely on explosives. They just work their way down the field consistently, picking up little bit by little bit, moving the ball down the field, being as efficient as they can possibly be. And so I think Utah, when you talk about this matchup and which style they would prefer, I think Utah, would be very comfortable, being in a tight game because they rely on the run game and eating up a lot of clock, some of these games. But at the same time, they've been so efficient and so good at getting the ball into the end zone. I think either way they would prefer, but I do think, we could see some points in this one.
You,
Is what I'm saying.
you know, and I part of me, I agree with you. I think we could see points, but I feel like with how close these teams are as far as the physicality, I think that's the foundation of these teams. And
Oh
Kalani
yeah,
learned from Witt. Like, really, what BYU does is a carbon copy of what Utah is and has been. I mean, the defense, again, different way of going about it, but the philosophies and what they're ultimately trying to achieve defensively, it's from the playbook of Kyle Whittingham and what the defense has always been. So these teams are very similar. So I always tend to lean in these rivalry games lower scoring. I thought last year,
oh
if there
yeah,
was
yeah,
a
yeah.
season where BYU could maybe put up some numbers, I thought, okay, Utah's down and out. But we saw what happened. I mean, it took some heroics late for BYU to win it. So I guess I would love to see a high scoring game. And I think it's
Yeah, yeah.
possible. But I guess I always just kind of lean to these defenses will show up. And to me, I think BYU really would like that because I think BYU's offense last week against Arizona, there were some lulls, Steve, where that second half, it's like, okay, they get down 24-14, 11 minutes to go. It might be turn out the lights, get off the mat, and try to bounce back for Utah. So I feel like the defense will show up. Offense, I think the BYU's offense has been good and very productive with having a true freshman quarterback. But I tend to, in this matchup, always look at low scoring game and maybe last one with the ball
Yeah.
has a chance to win it.
No, I think if you're Utah, you want to push this out, certainly, right? Offensively, get some points on the board and put the ball in Bear Bachmeier's hands to make plays and that sort of thing. This BYU offense is capable of explosives. It's capable of generating big plays and turning momentum. And I think that's going to be the big key, right? Is forcing them to become more efficient. Because that's where Utah has just been so good offensively, is being efficient and putting themselves in easier opportunities to convert on conversion downs. And then just to, once they get in to the red zone, I saw something somewhere and I haven't been able to find it. It was like one of those where you're on Twitter and you're in the For You tab and you see it, and then all of a sudden it refreshes and you can't find
Yes.
it. It was one of these stats where it's like Utah is 100% touchdown rate when they're first and goal. And it was one, and I don't know if it was 100%, but it was a really high number. I haven't been able to find the stat just yet. But when they get into the red zone, they are really good at punching it into the end zone. And obviously a big reason for that is Devin Dampier, the QB run game, and Jason Beck just, adding a level of creativity that I think has been much needed for Utah coming off of the Andy Ludwig era. But, with this one, Mitch, I think, this is fascinating because we're also talking about two defenses as you're talking about the BYU offense wanting this to be low scoring. We're talking about two defenses that are two of the top three
Yeah.
scoring defenses in the Big 12 behind only Texas Tech. So, I think this game just eerily similar in terms of production, eerily similar in terms of, the performance and what these teams tried to do. And I think you hit the nail on the head is that, this is, a carbon copy of Kyle Whittingham ball, specifically, more so on the defense side of the ball, maybe than the offense. I think Aaron Roderick has done a great job there of, finding his offense and really leaning into it, creating his own vibe. And I think that's been really impressive to watch from afar. But yeah, this one could go any which way. And I wouldn't be surprised, just again because these teams are so similar in how they perform.
Yeah, and I look at too even some of the advanced stats, things like stuff rates. Just it's all similar.
Yep.
It's all very
Yeah.
close in proximity, and it makes me wonder. How do you think someone like Beck is going to call this game? I mean, he's been part of the rivalry as a player at BYU. He was part of BYU's coaching staff, but this is his show now with the offense. And I know BYU staff with Kelly Papinga, they know Jason Beck very well. He knows Marky Atawaya too. I got to imagine that they're going to bring all the stops to try to slow down Dampier. I think that, BYU's defense has been very opportunistic. They're good at takeaways. You go back to last season, they had 13 games last year, all 13. They had at least one interception, all but one game this year. So 18 of the last 19 games, BYU has at least one interception. And I think that's noteworthy because we know in this rivalry, Steve, that takeaways are massive. But what are you expecting from Beck and the way he goes about it play calling wise?
Yeah, no, Mitch, to your point, I was just thinking about this. I did an episode before the season started, and I predicted one key stat for each game. And the key stat for this one is the turnover margin. You go back and you look at the difference over the last few games, it's always come down to the turnover margin. Who wins the turnover margin wins the game. And so I think above all else, that's going to be the point of emphasis for Coach Beck. And talking about how he's going to call this game, I'm fascinated to see it because in these big games, on these big stages, I think there's an opportunity for coordinators to, pull out some new layers and new options that we haven't seen, right? As they get into each and every week of the season, they're tweaking things and adding different dynamics to their play calling. And so this one, we haven't seen Beck, with a truly healthy Devin Dampier in a big game so far. At least with Utah, obviously you can go back and watch some stuff from New Mexico and what they did there. But this team is so different than that New Mexico team. I'm really interested to see what Beck does because we just don't know. He is kind of an X factor in this with how he elects to call this game. I think there's a lot of belief in Devin Dampier as a passer. We haven't seen them push the ball down the field, but I know that there's a desire to do so. But they've just been so efficient and so good up front that it's like, why go away from that? And I think BYU is going to come into this obviously gearing up to stop the run and limit the run. And so there's going to have to be counters, and this is the chess match between coordinators, right? You're trying to figure out what the opponent is going to do, and they're trying to figure out what you're going to do, and you've got to have counters to what they're going to do. And so just this chess match is going to be a lot of fun, and I'm really interested to see what Beck does this weekend because again, we just don't know, and he's going to be an X factor for sure.
I agree, and I'm really curious to see the battle in the trenches. I even brought it up to Keanu
Yeah.
Tanavasa, that chess match, because that Utah offensive line knows everything about him, and he knows everything about the Utah offensive line. That's going to be a fascinating matchup for BYU. Their quarterback, Bear Bachmeier, he's been darn near flawless. I mean, for the most part. Last week, had some mistakes, 2 interceptions, also put the ball on the turf, but he had 22 carries, which was crazy. He comes into the post-game press conference, looks at the stat sheet and goes, oh my gosh, 22 carries. I think he was even blown away that he toted the rock that much. I don't expect that to happen, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's getting at least 15 carries. BYU is going to want to establish the run. I feel like in this rivalry game too, the team that can run the ball effectively typically comes out on top. I know that
Yeah.
the turnover margin is always huge in this one, and really it is. BYU's +5 in the last 2. You go back to 2019, Utah had 2 pick sixes against Zach Wilson, but I think running the football is almost just as big. LJ Martin's been excellent for BYU. What do you make of like the running back situation for Utah and maybe the distribution? Because they kind of got a 1A and 1B sort of deal in that backfield, and either guy could really be the feature back, if you will.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with this in the run games, right? Like both teams want to run the ball. They want to establish the run. LJ Martin has been so fantastic for BYU this year, running between the tackles. Man, he's got a little like I reminded of like Zach Charbonnet at UCLA.
Mm.
Um, kind of a bigger body, but just so explosive, changing directions at times. He's and so I see that in him, and that's going to be a factor. And with Bear Bachmeier and how big he is, he's a fullback playing quarterback, and that's not to take away anything from, not to say anything of his, but that's just how big he
Oh
is,
yeah,
dude. He's
he's
so
physical,
big.
linebacker, fullback mentality. I mean,
Yeah.
he likes to run.
Yeah, and to have that as an option on a keeper is just a really fascinating card to play. Obviously, with Devin Dampier and the run game, like Utah fans are very familiar with the QB run and the QB keeper, but it's just so different, right? Dampier is much more elusive and forces missed tackles by avoiding them rather than just running through them. And I think that's going to be an element in this one for sure. With Utah's running back situation, they're in great shape. The last couple seasons, Utah's been bogged down by injury. They've had to grind out, a handful of players, overwork them at times. And I think what they've done is they've done a really good job of managing the workload for their top two running backs, where they're coming into this feeling great. There's a lot of tread on the tire when you look at the carries and how it's been distributed between not only N'Kerry Rogers and Wayshawn Parker, but also Devin Dampier and other players that factor into the running game as well. Daniel Bray is starting to emerge as another option for Utah in this rushing attack, which he adds a fastball to this to this group. He's got speed. He was a 10-3 athlete. And the most impressive thing about him, though, is actually his balance. Like,
Hmm.
I think there are a lot of guys that can run fast, in a straight line, but he has this balance where he can change directions, without losing much balance. And that's always a big thing for those fast guys. But with N'Kerry, you've got a guy that can carry the rock, and just be that constant jab, right? Talking about a boxer and sort of bringing that and comparing him to that, is he's just that consistent jab, just picks up 4 or 5 consistent yards. He's tough. He's not overly athletic or overly powerful, but he runs really, really hard. And then Wayshawn's shown some big play potential. And I think Utah's been wise to preserve him and to allow N'Kerry Rogers to be kind of the battering ram, because as you get late into the season, health at that position is so important. And Wayshawn is clearly, he offers a little bit more explosion and a little bit more big play potential. And I think this could start to be the game where we see some of the carry distribution shift a little bit more towards Wayshawn. That'll certainly be something I think a lot of fans will love to see.
The big playability on the ground, I think, is a great point because Parker definitely has that. LJ, we've seen that early in the
Yeah.
season. Last week against Arizona, he popped off a big one. Whoever can get the chunk yardage on the ground, I think, will be a game changer. I think back to like 2011, John White, the Wolf Man, he had himself a day. Running backs that can go off in this game, I just think it almost settles the nerves a little bit. It just
Yeah.
eases everything. And for BYU, it's kind of a thin line because you brought up all those names with Rogers and Parker, and then of course Dampier, who can run the rock too. For BYU, it's pretty much Martin and Bear and bust. I know they got Preston Rex, former safety running back, but the absence of Sione Moa, I think, is significant for BYU because they don't really have a proven number 2 after LJ. And so all the workload is going to be on LJ's shoulders. And then, of course, Bear. I'm really intrigued to see what that number is going to look like for Bear against Utah's defense. I got to think it's going to be, 22 plus for LJ. They're going to want to run the rock. But, Bear's number is going to be something of interest to me because it was huge against Arizona and against Colorado. He was running the rock a lot as well.
And Mitch, we're talking about the run game, and I think this is going to be. I think the run game for both teams is going to be a big factor. I think, and so conversely, it's going to be about potentially who defends the run better. And I think with Utah, what's interesting is, they've been battling some injuries along the defensive front and defensive tackle specifically. And last week, Aliki Vamahi was finally, nobody's 100%, but he's as healthy as he's been in a long time. He was able to play the majority of that Arizona State game. Dallas Vakalahi, who retweaked an injury he suffered earlier in the year against West Virginia, he looked improved against Arizona State. He only played 20 snaps, but in those 20 snaps, looked explosive, looked powerful, looked like the defensive tackle I think many hoped he would be this season. And so, for Utah getting healthy at the right time, at that defensive tackle position could be, a factor in this one as well. Because again, like I said, BYU likes to run the ball. They like to run it inside with LJ Martin. They're finding a lot of success there. So that could be key. I'd be curious, Mitch, to hear your thoughts on the BYU defensive front and that run defense.
I think it's Keanu Tanavasa and John Talmoy-Payao are going to be the focal point in the interior, and I think they're going to be ones to watch of how they perform against Utah's offensive line because you do watch the Arizona State game. I mean, you saw it. Utah's offensive line dominated ASU, which was to me very noteworthy. I think people kind of just that surface level. They think ASU big plays, explosive, but they are a physical team that was really good stopping the run. and Utah just overwhelmed them. I even thought, okay, they don't have Levitt, but maybe they could make this a defensive battle. That was not the case at all. That really kind of surprised me. Not surprised should be the wrong word, but I just think ASU is a really good run defensive team. So I think
Yeah.
BYU's interior has to show up. And Talmud Payau has been really good for BYU this year. The second unit is kind of an area that's a little bit thin. Anisi Purcell, he didn't play last week, backup defensive tackle from Southern Utah. He's been kind of their third guy in the interior. He's probable this week, so that's a positive sign. Justin Kirkland, the transfer from Oklahoma State, it's been a mixed bag. It's been kind of up and down. He's played, but you go back to the Colorado film, his first game, working his way back from a knee injury. It was tough. It was a little bit rough at times. And look, he's 340 and he's dealing with a knee injury. And so it's a work in progress. He might not be at his best until probably November, but those are the top guys to watch. I'm really curious to see Steve, and he's someone that kind of just flashed in moments, and really there's no stats on him this season, but he was a heralded guy out of Sky Ridge, went to Texas. He showed moments against Arizona off the edge for BYU. Tausili Akana, I think there's going to be some opportunities for him to come in off the edge. Maybe they just dial something up for him. The playbook has been hard for him to learn, and even Jay Hill noted that's kind of what everyone's deals with this defense. It's very complicated. I know Whittingham and even Kalani have kind of adjusted their schemes to make it more transfer portal friendly, to kind of hit the ground running, so it's not as long of a learning curve, but it's taken some time for Akana. I think there could be some opportunities for him to maybe utilize that speed, because BYU, unlike Utah, they're not getting home on the sacks. Jack Kelly's their top guy, and he's coming back this week, expected to at least, according to Jay Hill. But they haven't had a defensive end get a sack yet. And you look at Utah, John Henry Daly, a former Coug, he's tearing it up on the sack department.
No, absolutely. And, that's been an interesting dynamic is, well, I shouldn't say that is, but you bring up Tausili Akana and potentially his ability to crash, from the backside with his speed and how he can potentially impact the run game. That was the big issue for Utah last year, was they would try to run this option stuff with Isaac Wilson or Brandon Rose or Luke Batari and whoever else they had back there at quarterback last year. And they just, defensive ends were able to crash off the backside because there was no threat to hold them back. And so you're getting a lot of crash down on the run game. And that with Devin Dampier has not been the case, right? Because you have to respect Dampier in the option attack. And so that's given the play side action a little bit more time, a little bit more room to breathe and set up blocks, which I think has really benefited Utah, obviously. But, with the BYU pass rush, when you look at this game, I mean, that is the big weakness for BYU, but I think it's by structure, right? Because you like to keep players in coverage. And when you have a mobile quarterback, you're also, everybody's talking about it on the internet. You like to spy the quarterback, and that's a great system to utilize. But there's going to be a cost, and that cost is the pass rush, right? If you can't get home with 3 or 4 guys, and according to what I've looked at, you only send 3 or 4 pass rushers. I mean, let me rephrase that. On 141 snaps out of 173, you're only sending 3 or 4 guys. So you're not blitzing a lot. You're keeping guys in coverage, and that, again, it comes at a cost, which is the pass rush. And even with, if you were able to, like the matchup with Spencer Fano and Caleb Lomu on the offensive tackle at the offensive tackle spots, they've done a tremendous job this year of protecting Dampier. Obviously that Texas Tech game was a sore spot for them, but in every other game since, they've been able to control things, provide time. And so, I'm going to be interested. I do think BYU probably wants Dampier to be more of a pocket passer this year, to, do that little cage rush, which is something Kyle Whittingham always talks about with mobile quarterbacks. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the case. And again, that sort of speaks to the cost, right? Is you're doing these things schematically, and there's a sacrifice, and it's the pass rush, unfortunately. But that could be a key in this game, because Dampier, you don't want to just give him all the time in the world in the pocket, because eventually, he's either going to tuck it and run and have a lot of space, or there are going to be openings down the field. So this is the chess match that we're talking through, but it's fascinating. And Mitch, I'd be curious with the BYU secondary. You've mentioned that they've gotten an interception in a number in every game so far this season. What's that been like for Jay Hill establishing that sort of ball hawking culture, and how do you feel like the secondary matches up here with Utah?
It's been a huge development for BYU. I mean, you remember, Steve, like years gone by in this rivalry, BYU was always, play 7 yards off the line of scrimmage. They didn't have the dudes in
Yeah,
the secondary.
the drop eight.
They
Yep,
just didn't
yep.
have those guys. And now, slowly but surely, and some of them have been, out of sight, out of mind recruits. Case in point, Evan Johnson. He was a 2-star prospect out of Pebble Beach, California. He's been
Shout out Pebble Beach.
He's been excellent for BYU this season. He's a lot more physical too than honestly I expected. You go back to watch the Colorado game, some of the hits in the open field that he's made. He's a capable tackler too. So Evan Johnson, Therian Alexander III, sophomore. The thing was with him is it was a matter of kind of adding a little bit more weight. He was so thin when he arrived, but the speed, the playmaking ability. Then Maury Bamba, who's been a little bit up and down. I think he had his best game against Arizona as a BYU Cougar last week. Measurables wise, he's probably the best pro prospect in terms of just sheer measurements. 6'3", got all the hand size, the arm length. You love what you see from a guy like Maury Bamba, but they feel very confident that safety position. They're going to probably be without Raider DeMooney on the back end at safety. He's doubtful. He took a helmet shot to the rib cage. Cialia Serra's helmet got him in the rib cage on the side. Ooh. He didn't play against Arizona when he got that hit. He's doubtful this week. But the positive is that it kind of allows Falatau Satuala, a heralded sophomore, a heated recruiting battle in state, to just basically be the guy the entire game. They really like their safeties. Talon Alfrey's probably that third guy, with Tanner Wall being the other one. But they have a lot of trust in this secondary. And it's been a real game changer for BYU because it's a completely different look than what you kind of knew BYU to be pre-Jay Hill. And they've done a really nice job in developing talent and then also getting some higher-end prospects like Satawala in the mix as well.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting one with Satawala, having to play even more than he has. Like, he's been such a prominent figure in that safety rotation, it seems like, for BYU with Tanner Wall. And
what do you think of Utah's secondary? Like, who are the key guys in Utah's secondary for Cougar fans to be aware of, and what do you think their approach is going to be? Because in this series, you can point to many, pick sixes moments. I know in that 2019 game, Francis Bernard had one as a linebacker, but there have been, secondary players at Utah have been impact guys in this series. Who are the ones that you're keeping an eye out to have some big games in this one?
Well, BYU fans are plenty familiar with the name here, Smith Snowden, right? He's the guy. And this, to me, this is the top matchup. When you talk about an individual type of matchup, this is the one. It's Smith Snowden. It's him versus Chase Roberts. It's him versus Parker Kingston. I'm fascinated to see those two matchups because, Smith has done a fantastic job of, doing his job, right? Of taking care of business. I think what we saw last week, and I know Jeff Sims isn't a great quarterback, blah, blah, blah. But when you actually go back and you watch the tape, watch the game, and focus on him specifically, that was his cleanest performance in terms of his technique, his footwork, the separation that he allowed. Obviously he was flagged. One of them was absolutely bogus. It was 10 feet over the guy's head. It wasn't catchable. But in terms of just how he performed technique-wise, it was really impressive. And to go do that against Jordan Tyson was really impressive. So I think that's going to be a key matchup for Utah. Now, you're not going to completely eliminate a Chase Roberts or a Parker Kingston because they've proven to just be that good that they can make an impact regardless of who's lined up across from them. But the whole key for Snowden is to make it tough, make it inefficient, and to limit their production. Obviously, again, you're not going to completely eliminate them. I don't anticipate them, Snowden being left completely on an island against those guys because they're just that good. But I think Snowden can do enough on his own to make an impact there, which will free up Utah to focus extra attention elsewhere if need be at times as well. So that to me is going to be a big matchup: is Snowden versus Roberts and Kingston, and I'm really excited to watch those players go at it.
And I forgot to mention too, and that's a great breakdown. The Utah receivers, Ryan Davis. I'm curious. He came in from New Mexico, and I feel like he doesn't get the spotlight of the
Yeah.
guys that came in. But he leads Utah in receiving yards. Did you see this coming when he arrived with Beck and Dampier, that he would be at this point midway, dead center in the season, the leading receiver for the Utes?
It's an interesting conversation because we talk so much about the chemistry being a positive factor, right? But I don't think we really grasp what that would translate to on the field this season. So I think that's been the big thing for Davis, is that he's had a very well established, a strong connection, a chemistry that just can't be replicated by anybody else, over the offseason, because they've just spent so much time together. And so, it is surprising, but it shouldn't be, because we talked about why Ryan Davis would be a factor all offseason, being the chemistry that they had together. But what he's done so far, he's just been reliable. Devin Dampier throws it to him. He knows Davis is going to catch it. I think he's caught. I don't think he's had a game since the Tech game where he's had lower than 80% reception percentage. Like, he's just been so reliable. And the other guy in that conversation is tight end Dallin Bentley, and his emergence as another reliable option for Dampier in this offense. And I think he's a big body, and similar story to you mentioned Evan Johnson being a 2-star recruit. Um, Bentley was kind of came out of nowhere. He had a late growth spurt. Man, I wish I could go back in time and find one of these late growth spurts. Like, he went from 5'9" as like a junior to 6'4" by the time he graduated. And he walked on at Snow College and became a tight end there. And then, transferring to Utah, he's always been talked about as sort of this potential breakout player each of the last 2 seasons, but he's had things that nagging injuries that have just limited his ability. And he came into the season fully healthy, and the time that they were able to get together this offseason, speaking of Bentley and Dampier, has really translated on the field this season. So, Dampier's got a great connection with those 2 players, but I do think, Utah is going to need a third and a fourth guy to emerge in the passing attack to really take advantage of, the opportunities that defenses will give Utah, because they're so focused on the run game, right? So that's going to be a key. But I think this matchup with the pass Utah's passing game and BYU's or pass defense, pass coverage, is arguably the biggest X factor in this whole game.
And I wanted to ask you too, the surprise piece again. John Henry Daly, 8 sacks this year. Look, I was high on this guy when he arrived at BYU. I thought he should have played right away. He was elite coming out of Lone Peak. So good. He's one of the nation's leader in sacks. This is what this guy was born to do.
Yeah.
Did it catch you by surprise that it's taken off this year, and how good he's become for Utah? And like, listening to him in media availability, you could tell there's a little bit of emotion behind this one for him.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, for sure. He, tried to hide it, but he's got a bad poker face. And with JHD, yeah, he's been a real surprise. I remember all through fall camp, the talk on the record, off the record, was Cash Dillon, Lance Holsclaw, Logan Fano, and JHD burst onto the scene. Man, he had a great start to the season, and he's just continued to play well, and he deserves a ton of credit. Lewis Powell's done a great job of developing him, but JHD has done a tremendous job of working his tail off to capitalize on this opportunity. So, that's going to be a big one. I'm glad that you brought up JHD and the pass rush, because one of the surprise things for me in following BYU this year, looking at some of the numbers, the BYU offensive line with the pass blocking efficiency, when you look at that, according to PFF, it's Utah at the top and it's BYU right there behind them.
Yep.
obviously the run game numbers speak highly of the offensive line as well. How impressed have you been with this BYU offensive line?
Very impressed. Early in the season, they had some penalties, and I think some of that, as Andrew Gentry told me, cost of doing business. When you're in the trenches and you're battling, maybe you're going to get an accidental hand to the face mask, and you're going to get flagged for that. But the physicality's been there. There's been a few false starts, but the offensive line has been really good. And what's impressive too is Isaiah Jada. Remember he stepped in relief of Braden Keim late. I think you and I, or maybe a lot of the media, were heading down the elevator to get to field level late in that game. That was at the time when Keim goes out. Jada steps in late in the game, and he's part of that offensive line that helps BYU get down to set up a Will Ferrin field goal. Jada's been excellent at left tackle for BYU, and Gentry's been really good. And a Michigan transfer who really didn't play much in his college career. I think some Cougar fans were like, why are the recruiting services not ranking him highly? That's fine. He was just a great fit for BYU, and it worked out, and they're getting the most out of him now. He's been the starter at right tackle. They've been really good. They've been rotating a lot at guard. Waylon Lapuaho, Austin Leausa, Kyle Safarachok, who had the big fumble recovery late in the fourth quarter to maintain BYU's drive to ultimately tie the game against Arizona. So they've been rotating a lot at guard when that's been kind of consistent, which has been a little bit surprising because I thought coming into the year, Lapuaho was the best guy, but Jada, a guy that really didn't play on Coach Prime's Colorado team in year one when they were awful on the O-line. He never played at all. He's probably been their best guy, and Gentry right behind. Bruce Mitchell's had a few issues with the snaps last week. You go back and watch the Arizona game. High snap that led to Bear trying to improvise, and he threw a pick on that play. Something to watch there, but by all accounts, been very, very impressed with BYU's offensive line. TJ Woods, the O-line coach, last year stepped in. He's done an excellent job for BYU, and again, it really goes back to the chess match narrative because they all know each other. They all know how they operate and tick, and then it's just kind of those thin margins of who kind of gets the upper hand on a few plays to allow for a big play to set free. Can BYU's wide receivers, generate some blocks upfield to get LJ Martin down, to pop off a big run? Little things like that are going to be the difference in this game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to me, behind Smith Snowden versus Roberts and Kingston, it's this mashup between JHD, Logan Fano, Isaac Jada, and Andrew Gentry. This is the number 2 matchup for me because I do think Utah wants to get home with the base pass rush, right, to keep players in coverage, and Utah's been able to do that all season long, is get pressure with just 4. And Utah has the second highest pressure rate in the Big 12 at over 40%, over 41%, which I don't know how much that 1% difference makes, but I'll be fair, 41.5% to be specific. And yet again, like I said, BYU's offensive line, number 2 behind Utah in terms of pass blocking efficiency. So that group is doing a really good job of limiting pressure, limiting sacks. And I think that could be a key factor in this game with Utah's pass rush, the ability to generate pressure and force Bachmeier to speed up his clock, right? That's always kind of a thing with freshman quarterbacks is, can you get them, uncomfortable? And that could be, a determining factor for Utah.
And when people ask me about, what this BYU team is like, I kind of point to the identity of this team being a little bit like Utah's early years in the Pac-12, where they had a little bit of an unconventional quarterback. Bear Bachmeier, I think, is a better passer than Travis Wilson, but good team, great defense, but also, and I bring this up, the third phase, BYU feels very good about the special teams. I'm curious, Steve, how does Utah feel about the special teams? Dylan Curtis at kicker, true freshman from Murray. Great leg. I mean, I live here in Murray. He's like a Murray legend.
Oh, yeah.
His leg is massive. How do you think the special teams, because that, in the 9-game win streak for Utah, that was a massive difference for Utah. How does Utah feel about the special teams? Because I know BYU feels pretty good in that spot right now.
Yeah, I think Utah feels much better about their special teams than they have the last couple years. Dylan Curtis, I think everybody watched him against Wyoming struggle, and I think Wyoming, if you've been there, the wind comes and goes in all types of
Yes.
different places, and I think that was a learning experience for him. Is learning how to deal with the elements, and Kyle Whittingham has been really confident with him and preaching their belief in him and his ability to convert kicks. I think he said at one point they feel he's going to kick a game winner for them at some point this season. So there's a lot of confidence in him, and he's got a big leg. That's what he's notoriously known for is his leg. He can boot him from 60 plus. Now, I don't think Utah's comfortable just yet in terms of attempting from those
Hmm.
sorts of distances. He's been mostly 45, 50 yards. That's sort of his range right now. And I think for him, it's just a matter of getting comfortable. He hasn't had a whole lot of opportunity. He's only attempted 8 field goals this year. But I think the big thing that he's brought is, and this is crazy to say, but Utah fans will just have shouted to the mountains in joy that he's been able to boot the ball through the end zone on kickoffs and force touchbacks, man. It's been a gripe for Utah fans for years that Utah just doesn't kick it out of the end zone. And I think that's been a big thing, is just kicking it out and giving the offense the ball at the 25. I think that's been a thing that's been consistent this year as well. And then, with the punter and the return game, it's been a little hit or miss. There's been more positives than negatives, but I agree, Mitch. I think in a game like this, right, where these two teams are so evenly matched, it's going to come down to the margins in special teams, uh, which includes, trick plays and stuff.
Hmm.
That's going to be a factor, and we know that Kalani and that group, Kelly Papinga, they've got a bag, and so that's going to be stuff to be mindful of in this game.
Absolutely agree. And I'm glad we talk about the special teams because this game makes really anyone, I think, potentially a GOAT or a
Yeah,
legend. And for Will Farron, I'm telling you, Steve, he goes to BYU games, he gets the loudest cheers out of anyone. Why? He's really good, but it's because of that kick last year
you didn't have to
against
say it.
Utah,
You didn't have to say it,
the
Mitch.
44-yarder to win it. And I think back to there's been many, last second kicks. Jurgensen
Yeah,
back in 93 changed the trajectory of the rivalry. 2012, BYU misses late. Kanashiro. I mean, there's been so many moments where the kickers, they become legends or they are just, like, I don't want to hear the name.
yeah,
So it plays a
yeah,
big role. And I like that you bring up the special teams trick plays too, because I think back to the 2006 game. When you said that, I remember Louis Sakota had a fake punt that altered the course of the game. BYU was up 14-0, and then Utah started to settle in, and BYU needed some late game heroics. So special teams always play a massive role in BYU and Utah games, and I cannot wait for this one, Steve. I know you're going to be there in the press box. I'll be there as well. 6 o'clock kick on Fox. We'll have the BYU call on KSL News Radio. Extended pregame will begin at noon, but it's going to be a busy time for us, Steve. At least we're not going to have a late night where we're up till like 4 a.m. like last year. I like to think
I mean, that's
it's possible still.
easy to say right
Yeah,
now,
it's
but
probably
like once
possible.
we get in there, like, yeah, we'll see. I think I'm gonna, very easily could be up till 4 a.m.
It's very possible. This game always has endless storylines and crazy things that have us just going, that just happened. Like I remember seeing you after you experienced the press conference where you set social media ablaze and posted that video. And I was like, Steve, you look like you've seen a ghost. What just happened? You're like, I can't wrap my mind around what happened. Like we did a post game recap to try to unpack it. I just think you were kind of like, did that just really happen in that post game
Yeah,
presser? And it's
yeah,
crazy
that was
stuff,
wild.
man.
That was wild. And, like that's the sort of stuff. I'm glad we're done talking X's and O's of football, because now we can talk about the good stuff, right? The real rivalry stuff. And, not to, obviously we don't want anybody injuries, but the water
Yes.
bottle being thrown at fans, like,
Yes.
what are we gonna see this year, right? Like it's stuff like that where it's just it is ingrained in this rivalry, crazy stuff like that. Obviously, Mark Harlan last year going on his rant. I was fortunate enough to be quick on the draw with the phone, to have it up, ready to go.
Fantastic.
And yeah, man, that was wild.
Speaking of which, just saying that with you quick on the draw, I just forgot this just until now. Our guy, Jalen Glover, the Cold War. We need to bring back the Cold War. Baby. I love that clip. It's like, I thought that was hilarious. Is he at UNLV now?
Yeah, he is. He is at UNLV. I don't know that he's getting a whole lot of run, but he's down there.
Well, he gave a great drop. The Cold War,
he gave us that.
And then now we've got news anchors in the market like, oh my gosh, we realize this rivalry is pretty epic. Now they're tweeting endlessly about the rivalry. It is a crazy game, and all the stuff that comes with it is insane. Hopefully, though, the fans can have some perspective and go, you know what?
Yes.
Hey, you still got a handful of games remaining. Not all is lost. I do think more is on the line for Utah as far as 2 losses and maybe wiggle room for getting into the college football playoff. Because I think if you get 2 losses in the Big 12, it feels like, you're out. You have no chance if you're not an automatic qualifier to get in. So from that sense, it feels like a knockout game for Utah. But so much is on the line, and hopefully fans can just have the perspective, win or lose. It's going to be okay. They're going to continue to play.
Yeah.
Life's going to be all right, but they clearly want this one, and that's what makes it awesome. And I want that intensity to maintain itself. But in the words of the school presidents that are not having much success with their campaign, I guess rival right, I guess
yes,
is what they're saying.
Rival right.
They should have had us do the commercial. We could have been a little more
come on now. Oh, yeah.
We could add a little more flair to that thing. Rival right. Come on, guys. Anyway. Well, Steve, it's been awesome. I always enjoy doing these with you. Crossover podcast. Subscribe to Steve's show, the Utah Blockcast, and subscribe to mine, Cougar Tracks. I'm sure Cougar fans are already subscribed to mine. Your Utah fans are already subscribed to yours. But if you do want to cross enemy lines, you can check it out and see the other side of things. So any final thoughts, Steve?
No, like I said, really looking forward to this one. I think this game is truly going to be, a battle of giants, and 2 evenly matched teams with strengths on strengths, weaknesses on weaknesses, and I think this is just going to be a really fantastic matchup, and a lot riding on it, right? You just kind of said, Big 12 implications. There's still a lot to play for. And beyond this game, regardless win or lose, there's still a lot to play for. And so, I'm fascinated. I'm excited for this one, excited to get down to Provo and take in the game, man.
Likewise. And I always say this when this game comes up, I think it applies for either program. You can't have a great season if you lose to your rival. No one remembers, BYU in 2008 because they were a 10-win team, had a chance to win the Mountain West, but they lost to Utah through 5 picks. Utah's had some great seasons where it ends with losing to BYU. They don't remember those seasons. They remember the ones where you beat the rival. And so if you want to be great and have a memorable season that fans remember forever, you've got to beat the rival. And that's the challenge in front of both BYU and Utah on Saturday night. And we'll have you covered on KSLSports.com.